The history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union is generally conceived as also covering that of the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party from which it evolved. The date 1912 is often identified as the time of the formation of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union as a distinct party, and its history since then can roughly be divided into the following periods: the early years of the Bolshevik Party in secrecy and exile, the period of the October Revolution of 1917, consolidation of the party as the governing force of the Soviet Union, the Great Purge of the 1930s, the Khrushchev and Brezhnev periods, the Gorbachev era of reform, which eventually led to the breakup of the party in 1991. The history of the regional, Republican branches of the party does however differ from the All-Russian, All-Union Party on several points. Nomenclature. The party, with its lineal predecessors and SOIs and DEs, used various names in succession. 1898 to 1917, Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, RSDLP. 1917–1918, Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, RSDLP. 1918–1925, Russian Communist Party. 1925–1952, All-Union Communist Party. 1952–1991, Communist Party of the Soviet Union. 1991, various, including Communist Party of the Russian Federation. Formation of RSDLP. In January 1912, the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party convened a sixth All-Russian Party conference in Prague in the absence of the Menshevik adversaries. Over 20 party organizations were represented. In the eyes of the Bolsheviks, the conference had, therefore, the significance of a regular party congress. In the statement of the conference, which announced that the shattered central apparatus of the party had been restored and a new central committee set up, is the following statement: not only have the banner of the Russian Social Democratic Party, its program and its revolutionary traditions survived, but so has its organization, which persecution may have undermined and weakened, but could never utterly destroy. Moreover, the conference declared the Mensheviks expelled from the party. Thus the RSDLP effectively split, with the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks constituting separate political parties. In its resolution on the reports presented by the local organizations, the conference noted that energetic work is being conducted everywhere among the social democratic workers with the object of strengthening the local illegal social democratic organizations and groups. The conference noted that the most important rule of Bolshevik tactics in periods of retreat, to combine illegal work with legal work within the various legally existing workers' societies and unions, was being observed in all the localities. The Prague Conference elected a Bolshevik Central Committee of the party, consisting of Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, Sergei Ordzhonikidze, Yakov Sverdlov, Shuran Spandaryan, Philip Goloshchiokin, and others. Stalin and Sverdlov won election to the Central Committee despite the non-attendance at the conference, as they were in exile at the time. The elected alternate members of the Central Committee included Mikhail Kalinin. For the direction of revolutionary work in Russia, a practical center was set up, with Stalin at its head and including Y. Sverdlov, Spandaryan, S. Ordzhonikidze, M. Kalinin and Goloshchiokin. Writing to Maxim Gorky at the beginning of 1912 on the results of the Prague Conference, Lenin said, "At last we have succeeded, in spite of the liquidators come, in restoring the party and its Central Committee. I hope you will rejoice with us over the fact." Speaking of the significance of the Prague Conference, Stalin said, "This conference was of the utmost importance in the history of our party. For it drew a boundary line between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks and amalgamated the Bolshevik organizations all over the country into a united Bolshevik Party. In the summer of 1912, Lenin moved from Paris to Galicia in order to be nearer to Russia. Here he presided over two conferences of members of the Central Committee and leading party workers, one of which took place in Krakow at the end of 1912, and the other in Poronino, a small town near Krakow, in the autumn of 1913. These conferences adopted decisions on questions relating to the working class movement, including the rise in the revolutionary movement, the tasks of the party in connection with the strikes, the strengthening of the illegal organizations, the Social Democratic group in the Duma, the party press, the labor insurance campaign, and more. Work in the Duma. Another legally functioning central organ of the party was the Bolshevik group in the Fourth State Duma. In 1912 the government decreed elections to the Fourth Duma. The RSDLP decided to participate in the elections. The RSDLP acted independently, under its own slogans, in the Duma elections, simultaneously attacking both the government parties and the liberal bourgeoisie. The slogans of the Bolsheviks in the election campaign were a democratic republic, an 8-hour day, and the confiscation of the landed estates. The elections to the Fourth Duma were held in the autumn of 1912. At the beginning of October, the government, dissatisfied with the course of the elections in St. Petersburg, tried to encroach on the electoral rights of the workers in a number of the large factories. In reply, the St. Petersburg Committee of the RSDLP, on Stalin's proposal, called upon the workers of the large factories to declare a one-day strike. Placed in a difficult position, the government was forced to yield, and the workers were able at the meetings to elect whom they wanted. The vast majority of the workers voted for the mandate of the workingmen of St. Petersburg, to the labor deputy, to the delegates and the deputy, which had been drawn up by Stalin. The mandate declared that the future actions of the people should take the form of a struggle on two fronts, against the Tsarist government and against the liberal bourgeoisie. In the end, RSDLP candidate Badaev was elected to the Duma by the workers of St. Petersburg. The workers voted in the elections to the Duma separately from other sections of the population. Of the 9 deputies elected from the worker curia, 6 were members of the RSDLP: Badaev, Petrovsky, Muranov, Samoilov, Shagov and Malinovsky. The Bolshevik deputies were elected from the big industrial centers, in which not less than 4/5 of the working class were concentrated. After the election, the RSDLP formed a joint Social Democratic Duma group together with the Mensheviks. In October 1913, after a series of controversies with the Mensheviks, the RSDLP Duma members, on the instructions of the Central Committee of the party, withdrew from the joint Social Democratic group and formed an independent Bolshevik Duma group. In the Duma, the Bolsheviks introduced a bill providing for an 8-hour working day. It was voted down, but had a significant agitational value for the Bolsheviks. Outbreak of World War I. In July 1914, the Tsarist government called for general mobilization. Russia entered into war with Germany. The First World War had begun. The RSDLP denounced the war as imperialist. Moreover, the party denounced the European Social Democratic parties, who supported the war efforts of the respective countries, as social chauvinists. For the very outbreak of the war, Lenin began to muster forces for the creation of a new international, the Third International. In the manifesto against the war issued in November 1914, the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party already called for the formation of the Third International in place of the Second International. In February 1915, a conference of socialists of the Entente countries was held in London. The RSDLP delegate Litvinov, on Lenin's instructions, spoke at this conference demanding that the socialists should resign from the national governments of Belgium and France, completely break with the imperialists and refuse to collaborate with them. He demanded that all socialists should wage a determined struggle against their imperialist governments and condemn the voting of war credits, but no voice in support of Litvinov was raised at this conference. At the beginning of September 1915, the first conference of internationalists was held in Zimmerwald. Lenin called this conference the first step in the development of an international movement against the war. At this conference Lenin formed the Zimmerwald Left Group, but Lenin felt that within the Zimmerwald Left Group only the RSDLP had taken a correct and thoroughly consistent stand against the war. The Zimmerwald Left Group published a magazine in German called the Vorbote, to which Lenin contributed articles. In 1916, the internationalists succeeded in convening a second conference in the Swiss village of Kiental. It is known as the Second Zimmerwald Conference. By this time, groups of internationalists had been formed in nearly every European country, and the cleavage between the internationalist elements and the social chauvinists had become more sharply defined. The manifesto drawn up by the Kiental Conference was the result of an agreement between various conflicting groups. It was an advance on the Zimmerwald Manifesto, but like the Zimmerwald Conference, the Kiental Conference did not accept the basic principles of the Bolshevik policy, namely, the conversion of the imperialist war into a civil war, the defeat of one's own imperialist government in the war, and the formation of the Third International. Nevertheless, the Kiental Conference helped to crystallize the internationalist elements of whom the Communist Third International was subsequently formed. At the beginning of the war, in spite of persecution by the police, the Bolshevik members of the Duma Badayev, Petrovsky, Muranov, Samoilov and Shagov visited a number of organizations and addressed them on the policy of the Bolsheviks towards the war and revolution. In November 1914, a conference of the Bolshevik group in the State Duma was convened to discuss policy towards the war. On the third day of the conference, all present were arrested. The court sentenced the Bolshevik members of the State Duma to forfeiture of civil rights and banishment to Eastern Siberia. The Tsarist government charged them with high treason. At this point Lev Kamenev deviated from the party line. He declared in the court that he did not agree with the party on the question of the war, and to prove this he requested that the Menshevik Jordansky be summoned as witness. The Bolsheviks campaigned against the War Industry Committee set up to serve the needs of war, and advocated boycott of the elections of workers' groups of the committee. The Bolsheviks also developed extensive activities in the Army and Navy. The party formed nuclei in the Army and Navy, at the front and in the rear, and distributed leaflets calling for a fight against the war. In Kronstadt, the Bolsheviks formed a central collective of the Kronstadt military organization, which had close connections with the Petrograd Committee of the party. A military organization of the Petrograd Party Committee was set up for work among the garrison. In August 1916, the chief of the Petrograd Okhrana reported that, in the Kronstadt collective, things are very well organized, conspiratorially, and its members are all taciturn and cautious people. This collective also has representatives on shore. At the front, the party agitated for fraternization between the soldiers of the warring armies, claiming that the world bourgeoisie was the enemy, and that the war could be ended only by converting the imperialist war into a civil war and turning one's weapons against one's own bourgeoisie and its government. Cases of refusal of army units to take the offensive became more and more frequent. There were already such instances in 1915, and even more in 1916. Particularly extensive were the activities of the Bolsheviks in the armies on the Northern Front, in the Baltic provinces. At the beginning of 1917, General Nikolai Russky, commander of the army on the Northern Front, informed headquarters that the Bolsheviks had developed intense revolutionary activities on that front.